Welcome back. This, by my reckoning, is week 13 that we've been doing this. And I got to tell you, we've gotten out of the realm of basics. And a lot of what I'm going to tell you in this lesson is pretty advanced. I've got two topics for you. One of them is pretty advanced. It's called a line cliche. When I mentioned the ways of breaking out of the diatonic box, one of the ways I mentioned was line cliche. What is a line cliche? How can you recognize it? And how can you use it when you're writing songs? The second thing I want to teach you is kind of a basic. We've talked about scales. We've talked about diatonic scales, and I want to teach you a pentatonic scale. What is a pentatonic scale? I'm going to show you the first one that you can practice. What is it good for? Talk about what it's good for. I don't think that we're going to go into memorizing all 5 positions of the pentatonic scale, but we could. It'll help you, especially if you want to get into electric guitar, but knowing what it is going to help you anyway. Okay, first thing we're going into is line cliche. What is a line cliche? I'm going to demonstrate the first one. I think this one is the quintessential line cliche. Before I tell you what it is, I'm just going to show you one. Here we go. Okay. This is the James Bond theme. What is that? Well, the line cliche is going to be lines of contiguous ascending or descending chromatic notes. What that means is here I'm playing, this is just a standard E minor. The James Bond theme is in the key of E minor, and we're going to take the B, that's the 5th degree of the E minor, and we're going to go up a fret to a C. Now that C, when you take an E minor and you promote the B to a C, what you get, you start with E, G, B, you go to E, C, E, C, G. E, C, G, those are the 3 notes in C major. So this is called a C over E. So you still play the low E. The E is the bass note, but you play the C. So try that. Right? The next chord is going to go up 1 fret more. So that C becomes a C sharp. So that C sharp, now you have a C sharp E, G, and that is C sharp diminished. And then you go back down. But it's walking contiguous notes, okay? So in this case, it's E minor, and then you take the B and you walk it up. B, C, C sharp, C, B. All right? Now, we've talked about diatonic chords, diatonic scales. Where do we break out of the diatonic box? Well, E minor, the E natural minor scale is going to contain the B and it's going to contain the C, but it cannot contain 3 contiguous notes. Remember, there's never in a diatonic pattern, there's never 2 half steps in a diatonic pattern. A diatonic pattern, key, whole, half, whole, half, but never 2 halves in a row. So if you have a line like this, it cannot be in the diatonic pattern. In this case, E minor is the key, C is within the E natural minor, C sharp diminished is not. Okay? But why does that sound pleasant? Well, it sounds pleasant because the musician has established a pattern and you know that it fits the pattern. You can feel that this is not part of the scale, but it's not a stretch. It's just going on this line. That's the line. Okay? Now, I have played some other songs for you that have line cliches embedded in them. I'm going to go over one that I wrote like a year ago, or maybe even less than that. And I did it when I found out what a line cliche was, and I tried to do a long line cliche. So I'll play the chords for you and see if you can find the line cliche. Then we'll accentuate it and figure out how to use it, how to bring it out in the mix, okay? So this is the song about being a family of raccoons in a trench coat, okay? If you remember, it goes like this. Verse has a line cliche. What is it? Well, you start out with a D, and then you go to a D major seventh. What's the difference between a D and a D major seventh? The D major seventh has an additional note. That additional note is the major seventh, which is C sharp. So we go from a D, and then we add a D sharp. So that should tell you where the line cliche is and what direction it's going. In this case, it starts here on the D, and then it goes down to a D sharp. What's next? A D7. And that one has a C natural. So the C natural is outside of the diatonic box. And then it keeps going by going to a G chord. Well, the G chord keeps going because right after the C is the B. Then we go to the G minor. G minor might not feel common in the key of D, but it keeps the cliche going. Instead of the B in the G major, you flatten that to B flat. And then it keeps going because we go, the next after the B flat is the A. And I'm do that from a D major. Now, let's see if we can hear that. Ba 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 ba. Does it keep going? The next chord that I do is an A major, which has an A. So if I were to keep that going, it would have to be maybe A major seventh. I thought it should end at that point. I mean, James Bond is only using 3 chromatic notes, and that's called a line cliche, and that's the quintessential one. So if I stop after, how many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's pretty good. All right. Here's another one that just happens to have a line cliche. You probably don't even think about it, but what if we did this? So that line cliche is in there. We can bring it out if we want. We could have a chorus in the back going ba ba ba. The Beach always had a line cliche. Never understood why those chords felt good together, but that's an explanation. It's the same line cliche, the same descending pattern starting at the D note as in the raccoon song. It just goes a different direction. Instead of going from D to D major seventh, another chord that has that same note, that C sharp, is A major. So we could go back to the raccoon song and try and substitute that. I don't like it, but we could do that. All right. So line cliche is a line of chromatic notes that sort of fits in with a chord progression. Okay? Okay, so that's what a line cliche is. In this list of ways to break out of the diatonic box, first off, I listed line cliche. A line cliche, by definition, can't be diatonic notes. So that's one way. We've already been over secondary dominants, and we've already been over borrowed chords. Now, I haven't told you anything about, 2-5-1 transitions. I don't know much about them, but I'll tell you what I know in a future lesson. Tritone substitutions, we haven't gone over that yet, but I did tell you what a tritone is. Do you remember what a tritone is? A tritone is a 6 fret or 6 semitone jump in notes, and it's 2 notes that tend to cause a clash. Okay? All right, let's think again about line cliche. One more time, I want to go back over this chord progression, which is to Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out. Are there line cliches in here? And right off the bat, I can see one right here, C, E7 to A. Now that, if you know just the chords, that doesn't look like a line cliche, but if you know the notes inside all of these chords, it might jump out at you. The E7 doesn't match a diatonic chord because of the third. The third is a major, but in a major scale, which this is in a major in a major key. In a major key, the third chord of the diatonics is supposed to be minor. So an E minor 7th would fit in just fine, but E major is right here. And that E major is there because of a G sharp. The difference between E major and E minor is the G sharp in E major rather than the G natural in E minor. So given that, when you realize that what makes this one stick out is that G sharp, then you can see, oh, there's a G in this chord, there's a G sharp in this chord, and there's an A in this chord. So there is a brief line cliche. Does that explain why this chord progression sounds good? Maybe. But also, keep in mind that E7 is the secondary dominant of A. Okay? So this was using a secondary dominant, but it also sounds good because it's a line cliche. Those are not contradictory. You don't look at that and say, well, is this a line cliche or is it secondary dominant? It's both. And when I bring up line cliches, I'm bringing them up because they're pleasing to the ear. They're a pleasing way to the ear of breaking out of a scale. They're not the only one, and in this case, you've got both in a single chord progression. Okay? Okay, we've talked about line cliches now. Now I want to move on to a different topic, and it's one of the more basic topics. And I say that because I think that a lot of new guitar players will learn pentatonic scales early in their playing. You've been focusing on rhythm guitar, and I bring this up because, not because you want to be an expert and play a bunch of pentatonic scales, but because I feel like it's important if you're a rhythm guitarist and you need to talk to a lead guitarist, knowing what that term is, really grokking what a pentatonic scale is, can be very advantageous. So I'm going to go into that. First, what is a pentatonic scale? And then I want you to memorize one pentatonic scale box, okay? Typically, the way I did it, I was subscribed to Guitar World, and they said do one of these a week. And there are 5 pentatonic boxes, and you do the first one 1 week, and then you do the others each additional week, say, and you practice them all. And I still have memorized those boxes. So, but I do think that at least memorize the first box, and then if you want. I'll teach you there are others, but it's worthwhile to know those boxes. If you hear about the caged system, It's very related. The caged system has 5 positions, and the pentatonic boxes, there are 5 of them, and they map perfectly. Okay, so what is a pentatonic scale? All right, as the name would suggest, pentatonic scales have 5 notes per octave. The penta meaning 5 notes, and the meaning of it is we only use 5 of the notes per octave. That's less than the diatonic scale, which had 7. So we're going to basically take away 2 of those notes and only play 5 notes per octave. Now, as it turns out, as it just so happens, when you are playing pentatonic scales on a guitar, that comes out to exactly 2 notes per string. Whereas when we are playing diatonic notes, diatonic scales, those came 7 notes per octave, happened to be 3 notes per string with a little bit left over, right? When we were doing our 3 notes per string patterns of diatonic patterns, we would have to do a time change between the G and the B, and then we would be sleeping in, and we would end up a couple of frets to sharp of where we started on that last string. So it wasn't exactly 3 notes per string. It was 3 notes per string, but then there was a little bit of remainder. With pentatonic scales, though, it really ends up nice because you only do 2 notes per string. Just like in diatonic scales, pentatonic scales have major and they have minor scales. The major pentatonic scale is going to be the 1, the major second, 2, the major third, the 5th, perfect 5th, and the major 6th. Okay? These are all notes in the natural major scale, in the major scale, but we've removed the major 7th and the perfect 4th. So we only do the 1, the 2, the 3, the 5, and the 6. What about the minor? Well, the minor is going to be the 1, the flat 3, the 4, perfect 4th, the perfect 5th, and the flat 7th. Okay, now if you remember the minor scale, you'll remember that the minor scale has the 1, the major second, the flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, and flat 7. So we just taken away the 2 and the flat 6. Okay? Now, is there an easy way to remember which notes are in these? Actually, there is. If you recall, I'm going to draw another piano. Okay? Here's a piano. This is the note that's C, okay? When we were doing the diatonic scales, we said, key, whole, half, whole, half. It maps to the white keys on a piano. Guess what? The pentatonic scales map to the black keys on a piano. You'll notice that there are 5 black keys per octave on the piano. 5 black keys per octave on the piano. Now, if you just start on the F sharp, that's better. If you start on the F sharp right here, you'll see there's a whole step, a minor third, whole step, and another minor third. Okay, this is another F sharp. And that is the major pentatonic scale. If you start out here on the D sharp or E flat, if you start here, you will get the minor pentatonic, where you start out a major third. This goes from 1, flat 2, 2, flat 3, 3, 4. So 1, flat 3, whole, minor third, jump from here to here, and then this is another D sharp for the octave. So if you're visualizing what a pentatonic scale is, think about this. Whereas the diatonic scale was all wholes and half steps, the pentatonics are all whole steps or minor thirds. Okay? Now, let's learn a box. Okay, the first box I'm going to show you is the A minor pentatonic. That was the first pentatonic scale that I learned. You're going to start on the 5th fret on the 6th string. Now the interesting thing that makes this easy to memorize is all the notes on the 5th fret are going to be in this scale. So your first note is always going to be on the 5th fret. All those notes are in the A minor pentatonic. Then you're just going to choose between whether you're going to be taking the 8th fret or the 7th fret. And it's going to be the 6th string, we're going to do the 8th fret. Then the next 3 strings, we're going to do the 7th fret. Then for the last 2 strings, the 1st and 2nd, we're going to be on the 8th fret. All right, what does that sound like? All together, real slow. All right, as a practice, as a drill, it'd be really great if you could practice going up and going down. Okay? Now, why is the pentatonic scale so good for guitarists? As I mentioned before, there's 2 notes per string. 2 notes per string. And if you're going to walk a scale like that, if you're doing alternate picking, that means that all the time you're going to be doing the downstroke with the same finger. So for this case, I do a downstroke, then an up. Next string, down, 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 up. Okay? That means that it makes it a little easy to do all your string transitions in the same direction. That is, when I do an upstroke, I know the next thing that I need to do is to go down on the next string. Okay? So that means that I'm always going down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. And it's always going down that elevator the same way. It would behoove you, as you get better, to practice the other transition. And the way that I do that is by switching it up and go. All right. But that's pretty advanced. Right now, I want you to understand, really grok, that pentatonic scales are in a box where you keep your fingers basically in one area of the fret, one area of the neck, and you can go up and down that way. Okay, you learn the same notes then in other areas of the neck. This is box 2. This is box 3. Box 4 is box 5. That way you can play the pentatonic scales anywhere on the neck, keeping your hands still, and rattle off a solo. Solos often prioritize these notes over the other notes that are in the diatonic scale. So you can do a solo that's completely in the pentatonic scale. Lots of guitarists do that. When you've been doing pentatonic solos for long enough, you'll be able to rattle off a quick solo using just pentatonic notes. You can do that. You can also do some walking patterns like this. This could go. Right? You can make melodies with the pentatonic. One other thing about pentatonic scales I want to mention. we talked about how there's a relative major and minor, right? The C major has a relative minor of A minor. The C major scale has all the same notes as the A natural minor scale. Does that hold true for pentatonics? It does. So we could take the same pattern from the 5th fret makes the A minor pentatonic, and we can shift that whole pattern down to the 2nd fret. And if we shift that whole pattern down to the 2nd fret, that becomes the A major pentatonic. Just start, instead of on the 2nd fret, start with this note that's on the 5th fret. So we're going to be using all the notes on the 2nd fret and then alternate here between the 5th fret and the 4th fret like this. Okay? That also tells you that the A minor pentatonic is the same as the C major pentatonic. This box here is the C major pentatonic if you just start on this note instead of this note. Okay? So that's what a pentatonic scale is. It helps you get up and down the fretboard quicker than a diatonic scale. A diatonic scale has you play a lot more notes, but with just fewer notes, you can get from here to here quicker. Because you're not playing as many of the notes. 5 notes per octave instead of 7, 2 notes per string instead of 3. Okay? So I hope that tells you what a pentatonic scale is. Play around with it, because if I say, Matt, take a solo, you could stay in one of the pentatonic boxes and rattle off a melody. And that's probably an easy way to do that on a guitar. Okay? Okay. That's all we got for this week. We went over line cliches and we went over your first ever pentatonic scale. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next week.